My name is Denny Paul May, and I want to welcome you to KVEX training today on the inclusion of special populations. We're looking at assessment. It's that time of year. Special populations is what we're going to be talking about. Want to welcome you here. We're tickled to death that you've chosen to join us today, and hopefully we'll be able to go through some things and provide some information for you around testing accommodations is going to be the focus today. We're not going to do the entire inclusions of special populations training because we don't have time to do that. It's very thick, but we are going to focus around those accommodations that you're providing, the do's and don'ts around those individual accommodations, the most widely used ones at least, and just going to try to provide you with the, just another go through this, and then you'll of course need to be trained within your individual districts through the full inclusion training by your DAC. I wanted to just take a minute and talk about something that I firmly believe in. It's a quote by George Evans, and it says every student can learn, just not on the same day or in the same way. And that is something that we really share a belief in at KVEC. That's one of the things that we pride ourselves in, that we are including everyone, that we're including everyone on assessment. We're including everyone in our classrooms, and we're not excluding folks from anything when it comes to education. As we move on, there's just a couple of things I wanted you to consider. I want you to think about in your own classrooms before we get into the meat of the training. I wanted you to think about the different styles of learning that might appear, and the modes for learning. And this is a hot link, so you can click on that thing and it'll take you to a read about this. It's the VARC acronym. The visual, the auditory, the reading and writing, and kinesthetic learners appear, and there's some good information about that particular subject. But you need to be mindful that students take in information different ways, and some have a combined type. They'll, some are visual and kinesthetic, and some are auditory, and maybe they need to also work with information through reading and writing. So I'm one of those folks that I really have to see it, and I really have to work with the information. I really have to go to the website and read it for myself. One of the things that I struggle with is having someone read something to me or tell me a story and me pay attention long enough to get anything from it. So I really have to work and really be intentional. But you have students in your classrooms that hit all those boxes, okay? And so we have to be prepared to hit all those boxes when we're providing instruction. And then there's also that universal design for learning. There's a nice little understood article there that's attached. And we have to be mindful that we want to give multiple ways of representing the content, multiple ways for students to act on that content and express themselves, and multiple ways for them to be engaged in the content, to have choice built in, to have things that are exciting for them. So I just really wanted to throw that in there today. As we talk about inclusion, this is what we need to be shooting for as we look in our classrooms. And as we go to the classroom, we're hitting for that 7-10 split if you're talking about bowling. And I know you guys have heard this before if you've had my trainings, but we want to really put the curve in our instruction. We really want to put the hook in there, not just bowl right down the middle and just hope to hit a few kids down the middle that maybe can get it just from that presentation or that talk that you're giving them, but that you're finding a variety of ways to hit a variety of modes of learning. And so that was the intent of this early piece of work right here. And as you're new, you really need to wrap your head into these types of things and really develop your strategies for hitting all of these different types of learning styles. General intelligence really talks about that in present level, if we were to look at that really in depth. And so we really need to be mindful of what working memory and the impact it has. What does taking information in visually, what does it mean? Or what does it mean, the inverse of that, if they have difficulty with visual spatial relationships? How does that impact our students? And so it's a lot to take in, a lot to think about. So did you know that there's a KDE portal that includes a bunch of information about how to do the assessment for students with disabilities. We're talking about accommodation today. We're talking about the putting students on a level playing field. Accommodations are things that we do for students that provide access to the content. It doesn't change the intention of the learning. It doesn't change the meat of the lesson. It doesn't change what's expected of the student. It just puts them on a level playing field. If we were to look at the difference between accommodation and modification, modifications change what's expected of the learner. Accommodations put learners on the level playing field. But the KDE portal has an inclusion of special populations page, and it has assessment videos, assessment PowerPoints around administration code, and then also around the inclusion of special populations. Now, the inclusion document itself, the regulation, was updated in 2016. It's not changed, okay? And I've got that link down at the bottom. You can go to that and look at that if you want. It gives you the exact regulation. It tells you exactly what you can do and what you can't do and that type of thing. If you need more information beyond what we talk about today, you can go to that inclusion document and you can really get some more background reading on those particular places. However, we're going to take you to KDE's website here just real quick, and we're going to focus on this down this right-hand side, the training materials, not under the administration code, but under the inclusions of special populations. And we're going to really focus in on starting at, I think it's part 5. It's so we'll go to the full length PowerPoint. Now there's a video here that will train you up, and there's a guy, Mr. Howard, that works at the State Department level, and he's real astute in this. But we're going to attempt to take you through pieces of this and really focus on the accommodations, what we can do, what we can't do, the changes that have come up in the last little bit in regards to this. So we're going to open this inclusion of special populations PowerPoint, and this is really where we really want to focus our attention today. And so we're going to dive into these specific accommodations. We're going to look at the different types. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's the ones that's most used across the state, and the rules that govern what we can do with some of these things and what we can't do. These are the most used ones that are appearing on the screen. And so as we think about them, we will go into each one individually and talk in depth about that. It is so important that we understand the use of technology as the first one. And so when we look at the use of technology, we consider under what conditions a student will use the technology on a routine basis during instruction. Technology helps to foster independence. If we can use technology instead of a human, it's very appropriate to do so, because that human's not going to travel with us. Technology shall be considered as an early accommodation in order to help carry over to post-school activities. Assistive technology is allowed and encouraged on state testing. However, it's imperative that you make sure any assistive technology that is used is compatible with the state test that is being given. Any assistive technology that reproduces, retransmits, or saves, or replicates, or serves as a pass-through would provide a problem for you. So we wouldn't want to do that. If it's going to save it, or if it's going to maintain or replicate it, it would provide with us a security breach, and it's something that we don't want to get into. So however many assistive technologies exist for state testing, some things to consider for the use of technology. We need to make sure when we're looking at the plan that we have clearly an example in there that states if there's a difference between using a text reader and a human reader, then we should have that clearly indicated on the student's plan. When assistive technology is not appropriate, accommodations used will be based on the student's need and the ability level as designated in the IEP or the 504 plan. So very, very important to understand this. Technology should be considered first. Always, when you're thinking about accommodations, you should think about, is there some technology that we can teach this student that they can take with them after they leave school, after they go into post-school activities. And that has to be a consideration as soon as we start providing the education. If there's assistive technology that will allow them to communicate, we should be fine teaching them how to use it. And if there's assistive technology that's going to allow them to be educated, then we need to teach them how to use those pieces of information. So on the next slide, it talks about manipulatives. And manipulatives are interesting. They can be used for IEPs and 504s and alternate assessment. Evaluation, information, and ongoing progress data shall support the need for manipulatives. They cannot be placed on a student's desk, but must be in a situation similar to where they can access the manipulatives during instruction. So you wouldn't put it right on their desk, but you would put it in a location where they could get to it. And any pointing out of any particular way of using that would be inappropriate. All manipulatives should be free of writing. Manipulatives are allowed on state required content assessments, but are required to be a one-to-one testing environment due to the individualized aspect of the accommodation. The rules for manipulatives, as laid out by the inclusion regulations, are as follows. The card shall not contain any text or labels for students not taking the alternate assessment. This can serve to help organize the student's thoughts. Students with visual impairments may enlarge the 3x5 card to make the card usable. However, manipulatives placement during assessment should be consistent with where the placement is during instruction. The student has to choose which one they want to use and when they want to use it. Alternate assessment students can have writing and labels on their notes cards as long as it's not content. Once developed, visually impaired students can have their 3x5 note cards enlarged. Students should have access to every manipulative included on their plan, whether it will be used or not. For instance, if they have 20 manipulatives, different ones that are used or written down on their IEP, all 20 should be provided to the student on test day, and not only the ones the accommodator feels will be most useful for the content. Now let's take a look at the 3x5 note card that'll give us some idea of what we can provide for the students, both in the assessment for special needs students, and then also for the alternate assessment. So as you can see on the left, there's a graphic organizer there, and the graphic organizer has no wording. It has no information that would lead the student to any kind of answer. And so that's very important that we're not, remember, accommodations put us on a level playing field. It helps us to organize. Kids that have organization issues would need this. Of course, we have to have assessment information that supports the use of this. And then on the alternate assessment, it's okay to say first, second, third. You can say that, and you can. It would not, but it would not be okay to have first written and with write a thesis statement, second order the body of the paragraph, or third to write a conclusion. So you would stay away from putting any content specific information on there, but you would certainly allow the student to think about what direction they need to go in. It kind of helps focus them there a little bit. So on this, again, if we're looking at manipulatives for IEP 504 or alternate assessment, the one on the right is for alternate assessment. The one on the left are for IEP students and 504 students that are not on alternate assessment. Okay, let's do a little check for understanding here. So just follow along with me. So the first question says, why should technology be considered as an early accommodation? A, it's easier. B, they provide essential modifications. C, technology carries over to post-school activities. Or D, dependence on technology is ideal. The answer is in fact C. Technology helps foster independence and can carry over to post-school activities for the child once they exit the public education system. So very, very important that we understand that. Number two, a student is familiar with two forms of reading accommodations: the classroom teacher reading to him or using a text reader. What is one important reason the text reader might be considered as a first option? Is it A, text readers provide necessary modifications? B, the teacher cannot go with the student after they graduate, text readers can. At 3, the teacher cannot read as fluently or accurately as a text reader, or D, text readers foster independence? The answer is B. The goal of using technology is providing accommodations is to help foster independence. Once the student enters adult life, their teacher will not be there to read for them. And then 3, manipulative should be a one-to-one accommodation because they are unique to each student. Is that a true or a false? It is, in fact, true. Manipulative should be a one-to-one accommodation because they are unique to each student. And then let's go on over. I think we have a couple more questions from this section. Manipulative should be placed where in the testing room? Either A, the student's desk, B, a separate room, C, a central location away from the student's desk. The student may get up and access during the test, or on a computer or electronic device. The answer is, in fact, C. You're going to put it in a central location away from the student's desk, but in a place that the student may get up and access during the test. And remember, it said if they have 20 on their IEP, you provide them with all 20. All right, and number 5, student not taking the alternate assessment may have a 3x5 note card among their manipulatives, as long as what conditions are met. Is it A, only labels but no content is on the index card? No content, writing, or labels are allowed to be on the card. Graphic organizers are allowed as long as they are writing and content free. So what would that one be? The answer is, in fact, D. Both B and C are correct. And we're going to go on and talk about the next section of this, and we'll look at some information about the reader. So the reader is allowed on all parts of the assessment, according to your guidance on page 10 and page 16 and page 20. The test can be read cover to cover. Readers of multiple varieties are allowed on state test. Each individual test will have literature that guides you on how each reader is to be provided within that testing environment. Text to speech is allowed for students with IEPs and 504s and alternate assessment. A reader can read everything from cover to cover in the assessment to the student. If the student requests to read parts independently, that is allowed, and the proctor must stop reading. So the student can ask that the reader stop and that they read independently. So that's one piece of it. And then all students have the right to have great instruction, so that it's not a replacement for instruction. A reader should not replace top-notch instruction in a regular classroom setting. All students get core instruction, and so providing this accommodation should never be given too soon or in the place of good instruction in reading. And so that is something we always want to really make sure to think of. There are some other things that we need to also take into consideration. A reader must always watch inflection and emphatic speech. We know that we don't want to lead the student to the answer. We must have documentation over time that with intervention and high quality instruction, the student is still unable to access the reading assessment. So, for those kids that are non-readers, you need to make sure that you're doing your progress monitoring, make sure you have assessment information that supports the need for that reader as the student matriculates through school, moves through the grades. The goal of any accommodation should be that it be phased out over time, and the fading process is in place so we grow with the independence of the student. So the role of the reader here is something that we need to look at for just a minute. Let's dive a little bit deeper. Any reader must read the directions, prompts, situations, and passages as written, okay? A reader may not use or provide any additional information, even if requested by the student. You can reread any part of the test to the student only after he or she requests it. So the student has to request it. And then you shall not lead a student to an answer. A reader may reread any part of the test only after the student requests. If a student has taken the alternate assessment, they are currently scripted assessments, and test administrators may determine when a student is not focused, and they may reread to them without a verbal request. That's only on the alternate assessment, though. A reader may not point out parts of questions or tasks skipped by the student. A reader may read individual words or abbreviations mispronounced by a text or screen reader if specifically requested by the student. So very, very important to note these things are more, it's a little more of a deep dive here with reading. A reader may not lead a student to an answer. Remember, no emphatic speech when reading. So you don't want to inflect or, kind of point or kind of make any kind of a non-verbal behavior or even, a louder tone of voice that would lead the student to the correct answer. These rules apply to any state test given in any format, whether the student's taking a test online or taking a paper pencil test. Very, very important. And here's just some best practices around test administration. As a reader, you should never guide or direct a student to a correct response. When reading to a student, the test administrator should never lead the student to the answer. A reread may be provided only at the request of the student. The only time the test administrator is permitted to reread something without a student request is on the alternate assessment. It's up to the proctor at that point, or the person that's providing the accommodation, to make a call as to whether or not the student's off task and needs to be redirected, or the reading needs to be done again for an alternate assessment student only. So students must have a verified disability that impacts written expression. We're going to talk about scribing here, okay? When we're reviewing files out there, we're looking to see, does the student have the scores that support the need for a scribe? We don't just want to flippantly give a student a scribe and further enable some of their difficulties or their deficiencies. We want to make sure that they in fact have a disability that impacts written expression to the degree that their performance is significantly and consistently below same age peers. Now, in general, we would say, look at those written expression scores and say, is that score 78 or below? In most districts in our region, that's what we use as the cutoff point for whether or not we have a test score that supports that. And then we would look at the students' triangulation of data to see how they're doing as well, to further confirm that there's a significant and consistent performance that's below the expected age performance that we would find in the standards. District discretion of who can serve as a scribe, but you cannot have a peer tutor. No peer tutors are allowed to do any type of scribing for their classmates. So, and if it's someone that doesn't have a certified teaching certificate, if you're not a certified employee, someone that's giving that then needs to sign a non-disclosure agreement there as far as what they would that would allow them to do the scribing. The student is the sole creator, author, decision maker, and owner of his or her work, but unable to translate thoughts into written language. The scribe shall not be used as a replacement for writing instruction or assistive technology. So we always must first consider writing instruction in the tiers, tier 1, tier 2, whatever, but in that good core instruction of writing. And then also, is there any assistive technology that's going to aid that student in their abilities to write? And so the human scribe would be the last go-to in that regard. So just really quickly, just recap, you got to have a verified disability that impacts written expression. Just, if you've got a person that's LD in math, it probably wouldn't be appropriate to give, it would not be appropriate to give a scribe for that student. So just, you've got to be sure that you're able to review those psychologicals, look at that information, make sure that you've got some basis for why that student would be receiving that accommodation. The scribe does this. This is the role of the scribe. It records words for word what the student says. You're just going to say word for word, written onto paper or typed into the online platform. It's word for word what the student says. A scribe must then, regardless of the testing format, capitalize, and punctuate as directed by the student, and give the written or typed product to the student to edit or revise. You wouldn't alter, edit, or revise the student's own ideas or revisions or edits. So it's up to the student to provide the information. You're simply going to write down exactly what they say. You're going to allow them to format, capitalize, and punctuate for you, and then you would, as the scribe, capture that, but you would not do that for them. So your thinking is out here. Very important piece in regards to the scribe. We do not alter, edit, or revise the student's own ideas in any way. The rules never change whether a test is given online or in a paper pencil format. So best practices for preventing allegations from the testing police would be that a scribe should only provide the exact information that a student provides. All answers must be directed and guided by the student at all times. A scribe should only provide the writing support to a student when they have additional accommodations permitted on the test. For example, the scribe could not read a response back to the student unless that student has a reader on their plan. So we don't want to mix these things up and get confused about when to use what. So let's check for some understanding again. Which of the following is not the role of the reader? Reading the test book cover to cover, pointing out parts of the questions or tasks skipped by the student, rereading any part of the test if the student requests it, or read any words or abbreviations that the text or audio reader mispronounces. So the answer is, in fact, B. You wouldn't ever, as a reader, one of your roles would never be to point out parts or questions or tasks skipped by the student. If a student does not understand a word or phrase in a passage or question, is it okay to summarize or explain that the text to the student in language they understand? So let me read that question again. If a student does not understand a word or phrase in a passage, is it okay to summarize or explain that text to the student in language they understand? And the answer is A, B, C, or D. D is the answer. This is a bit of a change. No paraphrasing is not an acceptable accommodation. So this is a bit of a change. We used to be able to, a few years ago, we used to be able to paraphrase directions on the test. No longer is paraphrasing an acceptable accommodation at all in any way. A student is provided a reader. Number 3, accommodation in their IP. The test administrator is reading the test. The student requests the reader to reread the passage and define a word that's not understood. Is this allowed? Yes to both. The student has a reader and paraphrasing, and rereads are allowed. No to both. Rereads are not allowed. Yes to the reread. The reread is allowed, but paraphrasing, test content is never allowed. Or no to the reread. Rereads are not allowed, but the paraphrasing is okay. C is, in fact, the answer. Yes to the reread, but they have to ask for the reread. The reread is allowed, but paraphrasing is never allowed. So good to understand that. And then the second part of this check for understanding in section 6, who cannot serve as a scribe even if they have received the inclusion of special populations training? And it is peer tutor. Remember, a peer tutor can never be a scribe. Also keep in mind that if you're non-certified and you're doing the scribing, you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And your DAC can help you with that. Number 5, which of the following must a scribe do to ensure they prevent an allegation? Is it record only the exact information a student provides in the answer box? Is it reread the answer to the student provided? Is it never read the answer back to the student under any circumstances? Or is it correct all mistakes within the written answer for the student? So the correct answer is, in fact, A. You're only going to record as the scribe the exact information a student provides in the answer box. You're only taking what the student's answer is and capturing that. Don't ever help them with the test answer. All right, the next section's on calculators. Calculators all are allowed. Calculators are available on state test in handheld, online, or both forms, depending on the test being given. Regardless of the medium, the calculator is provided. Whether in a handheld or online variety, the rules that govern their usage remain the same. So this even includes sections of assessments tagged as non-calculator portions of state assessments. So if you have that marked on your IEP, and it must be consistently used and marked on the IEP, then you can even use the calculator on the non-calculator portions of the state assessments. That's not forbidden. Okay. Documentation of a disability's impact on math calculation and reasoning should have documentation of an impact on math calculation and reasoning. It's not an EL accommodation, of course, and it's not replacement for good mathematics instruction. Must also think about that the student is using that calculator consistently throughout the year. Okay, so make sure that you think about that as we move through. And then there's some here's a slide on the oral native language support. It shall be based on a student's individual language needs as documented in the PSP. It is not limited to any specific time frame. So it may range from specific vocabulary to render an entire assessment in a student's native language. And of course, you would get support from your central office staff in this regard if you had this situation in your school. And then there's some more about bilingual or English dictionaries can be print or electronic. Word-to-word translations without definitions and additional capabilities must be turned off, including the internet, if you're using any of these electronic devices. So make sure that you understand that flexibility to a test schedule on a state assessment is not permitted unless a student has oral native language support marked on the PSP. If there is a shortage of interpreters, EL students shall use a different test administration schedule than the regular student. And of course, you would get support from your DAC on this. Paraphrasing or simplified language are only for directions on this part of the test only, and cannot be provided on any part of the test, no longer part of the regulation. Okay, here's one that lots of kids have on their IEPs, extended time, committee or team decision about the amount allowed per student, time and a half or double time. Regular time must be used appropriately in order to receive extended time. So, you know, you're thinking about a student, if they have 55 minutes to take the assessment and they sit there and they sleep the entire 55 minutes and then they want to use their extended time, you should be documenting that the student hasn't used the time appropriately, and you should contact the DAC. Your committee or team shall have documented under what conditions the students will need extended time. And we look at things like, you know, your time off task, and we look at your processing speed scores, and we look at a lot of different things, but the committee should make that and have some basis of a need for that. It has to be a need base. You have to have need for extended time. And you know, of course, students with intellectual disabilities, lots of times will qualify for this, as well as students that have autism. So reinforcement and behavior modification strategies. So you can see this slide talks about you can use verbal, tangible, or tactile reinforcements for being on task. You can use technology to focus attention or reduce stress. You can, the student can be tested in a separate location outside the regular classroom. And you cannot influence, impact, or disturb other students. So, and it says right in the middle, positive behavior interventions and supports is indicated in IEPs / behavioral intervention plans as decided by the ARC or 5014 based on data. These things are given based on data, and the need for those are listed in your IEP. It's good to keep in mind that positive behavior interventions must be in place and must be documented under the special factors in the IEP. We see a lot of that with folder review, and a lot of folks are leaving that piece out. So we need to make sure that we're appropriately doing that. And certainly if we have that marked as an accommodation on the state test, then it needs to be addressed in your present level. It needs to have some evaluation support for that. And then it also needs to be mentioned in your special factors. Students who have a verified disability in the area of hearing and uses sign language as the normal mode of communication is what we're talking about here on this next slide. The interpreter shall not indicate correct answers or define words, provide content, teach vocabulary or concepts. Any person not working in a certified position who's providing assistance for a student shall read and sign a non-disclosure agreement provided by the department. We're going to check for understanding on section 7 as we move through here. If a student qualifies for a calculator accommodation, the students may use the calculator on any test, including the non-calculator portions of the exam. Is this true or is this false? The answer is A, it is true or true. If the student qualifies for a calculator, they are permitted to use it on any non-calculator portion of the exam. Which of the following examples of paraphrasing or simplified language may be provided on a state test? Paraphrasing the directions embedded within a test item, simplifying a test question by changing the words to simpler words. Paraphrasing is not an acceptable accommodation. C, or D, simplifying the directions provided prior to the test beginning. Paraphrasing is no longer an acceptable accommodation in any form or fashion on the test. Which of the following is not true about the use of bilingual dictionaries? They must be printed. They must provide only provide word-to-word translations without definitions. They may be electronic. Internet or any additional capabilities must be turned off. The answer is A, they must be printed. If a student is denied extended time on a state test, the test administrator should do the following: take thorough notes on why the decision was made, contact the building assessment coordinator and inform them of why the decision was made, and provide them with the notes. Is it both A and B or none of the above? It is C. It's both A and B. And then the last question: a student has a behavior modification or has behavior modifications on his or her IP and routinely disrupts normal classroom instruction. What needs to be done to test this student one-to-one? And the question and the answer is D, follow district procedures, and KDE will allow this to be a local decision for school systems. Just wanted to show you a couple more things as we move toward closing here. Got some interesting resources. There is a KD alternate assessment resource page that has tons of information that supports alternate assessment, that goes deeper into the training that's required and the modules that you have to take, and the information that you have to take the modules from HDI, which is the middle resource, in order to be able to give the alternate assessment. So if you need more information about that, you can reach out to the co-op, or you can reach out to your own district director, your district DAC. You have to take those modules and complete those modules. I think it's module 3 and 4 for teachers. And then you have to have an update each year if you're an FMD teacher and you're doing the alternate assessment. We also have a special education cooperative site that has been dedicated to low incidence. So I just wanted to share those 3 with you, because we've mainly talked a lot about the regular assessment for students with disabilities. Keep in mind that if you're given the test, make sure you want to get the full inclusion training. This is not the full inclusion training today. This was just pieces around the accommodations. What can be done with the accommodations? How can you provide the accommodations? And those that full inclusion training is required before you give an assessment, and your DACs in your local districts will be giving those. In your individual districts, you can get that information from them, and we're happy to help and assist in any way. And I appreciate each and every one of you being here. It's been my pleasure. My name's Denny Paul May. I'm a due process consultant. I also double and do some work with low incidence and transition. Work with Brenda Combs quite a bit, and Dion Bates, who head up our compliance and instruction divisions. as regional directors. And we're just happy to be here with you, and we'll provide you with any kind of information. If you'll just reach out to us, we're open. We like to tell people we're open 24/7. Just send us a text, send us an email, and we'll get back to you within a timely manner. It's been my pleasure today, and we appreciate you very much. And you guys have a great evening.